Awesome. Thank you very much. It's so interesting to hear all your stories, and they come from so many different angles, but having the common thread. And I'd like to start off probably talking to our founders about what are the challenges of working with defence as a startup.
I might answer that one first. I think the two biggest challenges are the procurement cycle within the military and funding. So I'll touch on the procurement cycle first. The procurement cycles are very long and quite prohibitive to innovation. So defence will often identify a need or identify a requirement. They'll then publish that in some form of strategic policy or document. A capability needs statement is then drafted, which is then translated into a concept of operations document, which translates a technical requirement to a user requirement. The government will then go to market with a request for information, request for tenders, request for proposals, which a whole bunch of companies will bid on to deliver this capability. Now, this process can take several years, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Innovation moves faster than the procurement cycle. So unfortunately, if you have a really good idea, often it hasn't been identified by defence and there's no budget in the pipeline to fund that innovation. And this is where I implore defence. I think it's very important that defence communicate with industry because Henry Ford, stated once, he said, if I'd asked the customer what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. So sometimes defence is asking for a faster horse and they don't realise we've got Teslas and Ferraris and Lamborghinis. And the next point is funding. So as a startup, funding is a challenge for developing technology and keeping staff employed. In particular in the defence space, these long timelines are not favourable to investors. So they tend to want a return on investment in a short time period. So we're not a favourable investment whilst we're a startup. Once we're in that pipeline, it can be very lucrative, but it's not easy to raise money. So with these long pipelines, keeping staff afloat, you have to get creative with how you sustain your business. So offering alternative forms of remuneration through to staff, such as options or shares, can help keep them motivated. But I guess the big thing for us was having an organisation like the Defence Innovation Hub really helped our business because without the Innovation Hub, we would have to look for alternative sources of funding. So one path would be a capital raise. Now, if we did conduct a capital raise, we'd have to find a dual use for our technology to make it attractive. So how can we apply our technology to a civilian sector? Then the primary focus now becomes a return on investment for the shareholder, which means we're not focusing on delivering capability to defence. And that's not why I left the military. So, being a veteran, I have a strong sense of conviction and purpose about affecting change for the job that I used to work in. So we opted not to do a capital raise. And then another option would be to conduct activities to generate revenue to self-invest, again, drawing away from our primary focus. So as a startup, it is tough. My business partner and I, we've done some hard yards. We've remortgaged our houses to fund the business. We've got very engaged and motivated staff working for reduced salaries. We can't compete with the likes of Google and Amazon, who are paying data scientists $350,000 a year. We've got Paul here working for a significant amount of equity, taking a minimum salary. And he's putting his livelihood on the line as well. So, by no means is it easy running a startup in defence industry.
Yeah, I mean, I mirror all those thoughts, absolutely. I think the hardest thing, maybe from a civilian perspective, because I've had no military background, is the language. So the language is something that you need to learn. You've got to be fluent in acronyms, in just the language that the military focus under, how they operate. I think that's always a challenge when you start. But in saying that, I don't think it prohibits anyone moving forward. But I think if you understand that or employ or engage with a military, ex-military person or a current military person and get a feeling for that, I think it'll be a little bit easier. The other challenge is you basically got, be it US military or the Australian military, they're run by government. And again, those government timelines are different than private industry. So anything that you plan around funding, and when you are successful with that funding, you've got to add a little bit of buffer to that. So you've got to think that, the project's going to technically end of this year, we're going to get paid in January. That's not going to happen. Okay, so you've got to plan your business and your cash flow around those challenges. The other thing is, again, the beauty of it is, and beyond the challenge, is it's non-dilutive. So it is worth a struggle because you do get non-dilution in terms of your equity. But I think the challenge is basically adding that extra burden around time and cash flow, essentially, is what my take is on it.
Okay, I didn't know if you wanted to comment on any of that.
I'd comment on the sort of the requirement piece. That's something that in particular the Innovation Hub has really been trying to sort of push and champion. So a lot of you may or may not have seen the release of our key focus areas that we put out, which was being a lot more prescriptive, not about the requirement, but the effect that the ADF want to get after. So leaving it to you guys with the smart brains and the ideas to then come with the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris of this is how you can achieve it. Because what we're looking at is sometimes quite archaic in the current way in which we do things, which the ADF recognize. But it's again about how do we be clear on the effect and apply innovation to also speed up acquisition timeframes. Time and money, the two biggest killers of innovation, which is something we absolutely recognize at the Hub and are really trying to work on as well.
Tim, your perspective as an academic.
Yeah, something that Ed said around the language and understanding how defence worked. I was lucky, as I said in the intro, that I got to work in defence for 5 years as a civilian. So I've never been a military person, but working as part of DST, I worked with a lot of military people, and they were our clients. So DST still had clients. And so being able to understand, some of the language that they use, understand a bit of that culture, and it is very different to working even in a sporting population. Something I always say to people is a lot of defence research is based on relationships, and you get the, oh yeah, no, I understand that. Same, with sport or this other industry that I work with. It's not, it's very different, and you can lose someone really quickly if you go in just with the wrong attitude or say the wrong thing or show that you aren't really trying to understand what their problem is. But likewise, and there's something that Dan said, once you have that relationship with someone, then that can be really fruitful for a long time. And so it is extremely nuanced. It'd be hard to write a book to say, do this, to do that, to do this. It's something that, you kind of almost have to have lived a little bit or be able to work with someone who's lived it and learn from them.
Awesome, thanks. We did have a question here around the funding model being different, but I think we've covered off the funding, unless there's some other points you wanted to make on the funding model.
I'd also point out that the Innovation Hub is not the only source of funding that you can get. There's the Next Generation Technology Fund. There's also a range of other areas of defence that do tenders releases through all the different services. You've got Plan Jericho, which is an Air Force initiative. You've got Army Miners Innovation. You've got the RECO, so robotics autonomous systems, that team over there. So there's a whole ecosystem in defence. And yes, the Innovation Hub is absolutely a flagship program for the department and the government, but there are a number of different programs. So I would definitely encourage you to look for those as well.
And if I could touch on that as well, unique to most states, and you can probably tell me which states start. I think now most states do. In New South Wales, there's the DIN, the Defence Innovation Network. So that's a state-based organisation, but they draw some of their funding from Commonwealth funds. There's the DSI in Victoria, and other states have different programs as well. And they, I've had and have some existing funding from them as well. And they have a range of different programs. And so you're not always, we always want to go for the $1 million grant. But it's going to take a while before you get there. What I found is that the DIN have a number of smaller project grants that you can apply for, which can help you to start to get that track record in defence. They can actually also help connect you with military members, so that the people that you're trying to answer a question for. And so in the DIN, there's a number of New South Wales, and recently I think ANU came on board to the DIN as well. And Macquarie is a DIN member. So, for those, I guess you're in Sydney, you're probably even working at Macquarie if you're here, they are someone to look at as well for funding projects.
I'd also just add that from a sort of Defence Innovation Hub perspective, there is a very big difference between a sort of a grant and a contract. as well, and what that means to the department and also to the ADF in terms of what's expected to be done. So with the Innovation Hub, we award contracts on which you sort of have expectations around sort of milestone deliveries and those sorts of outcomes contractually. So that's also a very big thing to think about when and how you're looking at funding, and what are the avenues for, as well as what is the nature of the funding that you're actually wanting to get and what comes with that.
I thought that we'd probably just move on to the next question, because I think we've exhausted the funding aspect of that, which is great. Having that kind of insight is amazing. So thank you. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about the commercial advantages of engaging with defence. I thought I might start with Dan.
Yeah, I think commercially, once you're selling to defence or any other government organisation, you are effectively recession-proof. So there are a lot of companies that were working in the health industry or fitness industry that when Corona hit and the lockdowns hit, they went out of business, retail and restaurants, etc. But working with the government, there's always going to be a need to protect Australia and its interests. So they're always going to need capability delivered. So I think it is a huge commercial advantage once you're in that pipeline.
Yeah, again, agree with all that. I think that the main difference, I suppose, the difference between the US and the Australian military, and I suppose the society. I mean, Yanks are very commercial. So when you go to the US DoD, one of the initial discussions you'll have is, how do we get this to the customer? Which is quite refreshing and quite shocking at the same time, because you're sort of dealing with the military. But as an Australian, you go, you want to sell to Joe, Joe and Jane out in the public, and that's how their model works. Both their research model is also based on that. So if you want a grant, being a university, most of your funding will be headed and controlled by the US military. That's who you apply your grant to. Whereas we go as an Australian group, you go straight to the government via the NHMRC or ARC. So it's a slightly different model. So you've got a more commercial sort of understanding from the US perspective than you do here. That's the first one. The second one is around novelty. So again, we tend to talk up novelty, but we're very conservative as a race, whereas the Yanks really just give it a go. So again, you've got this different sort of personality in the US than what you do in Australia. Qualifying that a little bit, the Australian military is starting to understand this commercial aspect and saying, yeah, we've got a company that's basically a private company that will only survive if they're commercial. We have to then adapt to that, and we have to be understanding of that. So obviously decreasing timelines, as we spoke about before, talking commercially as well, talking the regulatory stuff also. I've had an opportunity to get some funding and support from ODIS, which is the Office of Defence Industry Support. And they're a plug-in to the side, I suppose, maybe even with the Innovation Hub, who get that and help you with that process. So they funded us against getting some regulatory support. They're talking some commercial. They helped us build a business plan. So there is that capability within the Australian military, but it's probably not quite up to speed as what it is in the US at this stage.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else wanted to comment on that?
Probably just that, and always read the fine print of every grant you sign. But for the most part, what I've found around IP is that working with defence, they don't want to necessarily own the IP. They'll ask for a free license to use that IP, usually ongoing. And so you're not then having to, sell or give away that IP to the defence, as opposed to, working with a private organisation who are obviously going to want to own that IP so that they can commercialise it. So that's, a pretty nice, I guess, benefit to working with defence, that you usually get to keep your IP as long as you, give them the license for free use.
From on that IP point as well, from the Innovation Hub, we don't own the IP. We get a license unless there is significant solvent reason to do so. So that's the fine print position from the Innovation Hub. But it does vary across the department in terms of what it is that the department wants to do and what the ADF need as well. In terms of also the benefit of commercialisation and with working with defence, well, defence, the ADF, they're the end user. So getting awarded a contract through the hub to work hand in glove in developing your technology is paramount and sort of foundational to the way in which we work for that very benefit of actually having an end user give you that feedback and to develop that technology in conjunction with the ADF. So
That sort of goes towards the next question, which is really for you, Chris, which is around exactly what is the hub doing to support innovation and industry, I suppose, not just startups as well, but industry broadly.
So as I'm sure a lot of you know, but for people who don't know, we have an open 365-day of the year program that allows you to submit an idea against a very broad range of things, which we just changed on the 1st of July against the domains. So 5 domains plus defense enterprise. As well with that, like I said previously, we have our key focus areas. So that's undersea warfare and integrated missile defense. We are working on a guided weapons and explosive ordnance, but we will put that in due course. So with that, we essentially go through a 2-stage process where essentially the first stage is really asking you to put a high level idea to us and how it fits and meets a capability problem. And that how it fits and how you actually understand that is paramount. So talk to end users, talk to ADF or ex-ADF people before you approach the hub. There's no issue with that. Approach the Office of Defence Industry Support. They will help you. That is their role. It's Office of Defence Industry Support. So they really are there to help you get in touch. They can help you find capability managers to get feedback, because feedback from ADF personnel varies on the rank and the position and their perspective of the capability need, which again is really, really, really valuable. So back to the Innovation Hub, we also do targeted procurements, what we call special notices. So for example, we ran Army Innovation Day 2022 this year, which was looking at sort of medium, heavy and casualty evacuee UAV, so unmanned, uncrewed aerial vehicles to lift those capabilities, lift those assets. So that's from 450 kilos to a ton, or potentially personnel, 450 kilometers autonomously. And so those are the likes of challenges that we put out that have set timeframes that we would expect you to apply to. And typically they're either a 2-stage or a single stage. And for example, this year we had, working with Army, $20 million on the table. It's not a single contract that gets that, again, which is paramount. We award multiple winners. It's about having best ideas that meet the effect that they want to get after. So it's not about meeting the exact requirement on it that we put out. No, it's about how do we achieve the effect we want.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. I suppose we'll flip it on the head now. So Ed, can you tell us a little bit about what your experience has been like working with the Defence Hub?
I had a slightly different journey. I was fortunate enough to get some funding from the US DoD initially. So I had a bit of, experience in knowing what to expect from dealing with that. So my journey with the Innovation Hub as a result of that was probably a little bit more smoother, or by my standards was smoother, because I knew what I expected. I think, again, it's very flattering to obviously get in front of an esteemed body such as the ADF and actually have a technology which they support, which is great. I think the only missing piece maybe for me around dealing, and the Innovation Hub has been great. So we've had COVID. COVID's been difficult for everybody. We didn't really have to change much, around our language with the military. They understood. There might have been this expectation from me thinking, oh, the military, not very flexible, we're just going to go with it. The Innovation Hub was the opposite of that. They were very supportive. They were very proactive. Do we have to give you funding a little bit earlier than what the milestones were? Can we adapt the milestones a little bit to sort of meet with what the real world was actually telling us? So that was fantastic. Payments have been great. The manager's been great. And the beauty of the Australian thing is that we're smaller, we're more intimate, so we can speak to decision makers quite easily. The US is slightly different. So overall, it's been a great journey. I would highly recommend it to anybody that they do that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be military kit per se. For us, it's not strictly the military that we're dealing with. We've obviously got a different cohort potentially around sport. We've got emergency hospitals as well. So again, you've got to think a little bit outside the square around that opportunity. So again, it's an open application. I highly recommend that people do it. And again, look at those resources. You don't have to be scared off by the fact that you're dealing with a with a military if you're not a military personnel. So
Yeah, awesome. So Tim, have you got any insights in relation to your experience in engaging in?
Probably not specifically to the Defence Innovation Hub. Probably, just reiterating what I've, already said previously about having the relationships, knowing that there are different avenues, so scaling up, I think, you're probably not going to, if you've got your idea, the first step probably is, or first stop is probably not going to be the Defence Innovation Hub. So working up to it, having, many or a number of milestones already under your belt to show that you've got a viable product, whatever that product might be. The thing that Ed said around, while his technology will apply to defence, it also applies to other populations as well. Again, I'm a sport and exercise scientist, and so a lot of the work that we're doing around physical load monitoring applies to anyone who's doing anything that has some kind of physical load, primarily in sport. That's where that has come from. But military operators undergo very different kinds of physical load and very asymmetrical, I guess, if you like. So very hard to monitor. It's not 2 40-minute halves, and they don't play on Saturday and train Tuesday, Thursday. So it's taking something that you may already have a lot of experience and comfort with, and then looking how you can apply that. The other point that was made earlier was, how I guess where the technology readiness is, or the sophistication of some of the things that defence already do, is often lagging behind. I think it was Dan that was talking about this. It's often lagging behind. So the faster horse as opposed to the Lamborghini. So what it also means that you've got a lot of scope to get some quick wins on the board, which usually is what the military client wants. They want a result now. So understanding that 2-3 year posting cycle of a military contact that you may have, they want something within that posting cycle. So thinking about what's something that you can deliver someone short term to show, hey, listen, this person's got something, but then as a researcher, how you can build that into a longer research program.
Awesome. And Dan, having the most recent.
Yeah, I guess having a defence background, we kind of expected the project delivery to be fairly rigid. However, with the hub, we got the opposite. They were extremely agile and flexible. We had a fantastic project manager who helped us deliver our project about 4 weeks ahead of schedule to avoid delays over Christmas. She was instrumental in organising critical face-to-face meetings and workshops at the last minute, and making that happen, attending the workshops, and really helping us with our milestone delivery. Furthermore to their, I guess, agile nature and innovative nature at the hub, they run a 4-phase program to deliver capability, and we entered in at phase 1 with a fairly novel concept. We managed to develop some technology concurrent to that phase 1 project, and our project manager saw that we were doing this work and had facilitated us showcasing our technology to the Defence Innovation Hub, which meant that we've been able to effectively skip phase 2 and apply to go directly to phase 3. That has the potential to save Defence millions of dollars and upwards of 2 years of getting our capability sooner. So the people there are very agile and flexible. I guess it is a little bit of a shame that they've got to work within the broader procurement context of defence, but they do an awesome job in navigating that beast. I take my hat off to them.
The next question, I suppose, whoever this resonates the most with, please answer. So how do you balance the scientific outcomes against the industry ones?
Oh,
So I'm ready to go, or you give you some thinking time?
Well, I'm a coat wearing scientist at the end of the day. I mean, that's where I got brought up. 1 + 1 = 2. So you've got that, but in the real world, that's not real. Okay, so you've got to drop that at some point. You've got to basically say, my journey has now been, and both by this particular relationship with the military, it's all about an operator. It's all about a patient. It's all about someone in the field. So if we're very strict on what we're doing back here, because we've got to have it peer reviewed and 25 people have to sign off on it, you're not going to get an outcome. So you've got to start with the good science, but at some point the commercial hat has to be worn. And the commercial hat is the hat that actually gets it in front of the patient, makes a difference in someone's life. So my journey initially started in cancer research, papillomavirus. Everyone laughed at the virus causing cancer, and look where we are now. So we got a vaccine out of it. We hadn't had a vaccine when I was there, but I was very disillusioned with it because I was looking at patients and seeing no outcome. Here I am doing all this sexy work in the lab, but we weren't seeing any patients. That was further accentuated when a family member went through cancer, and I basically said, I know shit about cancer, because it is ultimately about the patient. So here I am with this white coat in an esteemed Sydney University environment, thinking I'm changing the world, where I'm not. So the science is important, but it's really, I think it's only a third of the story. I think ultimately it's about that commercialization, 2/3 that innovation, getting out there, getting something sexy, and forgetting about the naysayers, because you will have naysayers along your journey. In particular, if you have a clinical device, you will have clinicians who are very strict on their process or very staid in their ways, who will try and knock you down. So I think, to answer your question, Mel, I think that commercialization is 2/3 of your journey.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah, and it's something that I touched on a couple of times today already. You've got to be able to give something pretty quickly to whoever it is that you're working with, so that they're not going to wait 3 years to get an outcome. They will want an outcome much sooner than that. And so you need to design the project in a way that you can give something back really quickly, while still setting yourself up for a longer term scientific goal, which is, as a scientist, what we normally want to do. We're not solving, big scientific questions in 12 months, or even 3 years. But likewise, you can't, you can't give the client, okay, we're going to get back to you in 3 years. And something that I learned to do while working for defence. So, Army would come to us and say, hey, here's a problem. How do we fix it? And they would want something, back pretty quick. But we need to know that we could back that. So if something happened, we had the science to back it. So it was selling an answer to them, or selling a solution to them that gave them a pretty quick answer, and building in the underpinnings of good science behind that. I think also, and you see it quite a bit with some companies that will sell you all the gloss and glitter, and a shiny brochure, and that may get some quick uptake early, but they often get found out, and will often, get approached and say, listen, we're thinking about using, and I won't name names, but I can think of a very specific example, not local to here, where a university was asked to look more deeply into a certain technology, and that was done, and it was shown actually this isn't that great, despite the gloss and glam of the brochure and the marketing people. And so eventually they get found out if you try and sell too much, because that's the other way that you could go. You could say, yeah, I can answer that question in 6 months if you give me this much money. And you could sell that, and it's a bit of a, selling snake oil. So it's finding that balance right. You can't say, I'll answer you in 6 months, or I'll answer you in 3 years. You need to find out what's the most pertinent thing you need answered now, because the question that someone comes to you with might be quite big, but they may only need part A of that answered in 6 months and part B in 12 months. And you break that down. And so again, the relationship and knowing the language and what's going to resonate with someone, and dissecting that question so that you can actually answer it in a meaningful way for them, but with that solid science underpinning to it.
I loved that. I actually saw a researcher talking about selling. Watch that, using the words. You don't hear that often, and that's great that you've had that experience and understand the difference between selling something correctly and snake oil, which we all don't like. So thanks very much for those insights. I think now we need some tips and tricks. How do we engage with military effectively?
I think I might start on that one. So coming from defence and having quite a large network and relationships, it still wasn't easy. So I think there's two parts. First thing, unlike the US military, I think the Australian military needs to engage more with industry share their problems and let industry come up with the solutions. The US is very good at doing that. Whereas over here, the military is really just a big black box. And unless you know somebody on the inside, it's very hard to understand what problems they're facing. And so you can't solve something if you don't understand the problem. However, I think as a first port of call, there's a lot of open source documentation. So strategic documents, the defense white papers, strategic updates, defense data strategy, integrated investment plans that dictate the effect that defense is trying to achieve. And if you read those documents, you'll have a fairly good understanding of what defense is trying to do. And then if you have a technology that it might be in a completely different industry, something might click and you might think of a way to repurpose that technology for defense. So I think that's the first port of call. And then the second port of call, I would recommend applying to go to trade shows, land forces, Indo-Pacific, the two big ones in Australia, in Sydney and Brisbane. There, you'll see lots of personnel in uniform walking around. Go say hello, have a coffee with them. You know, just do whatever you can to get a bit of insight. And, you know, at worst, you get nothing. And at best, they'll point you in the right direction. And then lastly, I think it's engaging with programs like the Defence Innovation Hub. They've got a fairly comprehensive website with calls for submissions. They're fairly open and transparent with how they do business. And that's how we first got started as a startup. So that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. I think we heard your tip, go to America, engage with
Yeah, do it the other way around.
Yeah.
No, I agree with all that. I think the white paper is gold. I think if everyone reads the white paper, they'll have understanding of what the language is. I also listen to Defence Connect, which is a weekly podcast that comes out, which again gives you some insight into what that language might be. I heard one this morning, and you know I've cut and pasted a couple of things that come out of that as well today. I think that's important. I think you've just got to understand how that system works. And the military is no different than anybody else. You've really got to put yourself in the position of that particular person as a business owner or as an innovator or as a scientist. I think the Innovation Hub gives you that angle to be able to do that. So yeah.
But also add there's other events. So you've got Avalon Air Show. There's also the LUG, Land Environmental Working Group, that's actually going to be coming up quite shortly. There was previously, but the nature of how it was facilitated was a bit different this year. You have the Maritime Environmental Working Group, the MQi. So there are a range of different events that are put out. So again, if you also go on Office of Defence Industry Support's website, they also promote a range of different events. In terms of hints and tips, well, we've actually got a thing on our website that's called Hints and Tips. That when you're wanting to actually submit to the Innovation Hub, that's something that we recognized about 15-ish, 12 months ago. After being open for a few years, we realized that we weren't as transparent as we should in terms of what it is and the quality and the perspective and detail that you need to provide when actually approaching a program like the Innovation Hub. So we've genuinely tried to be more transparent. So we've got exemplars of different stages of the procurement process or different maturity, and what the detail expected from you to actually articulate to defence. And again, there's nothing more gold than actually talking to a military person or even a departmental person, because they can have dual hats in terms of you have defence enterprise that affects both the ADF and the department as well. There's a huge amount of data opportunities that exist for the department and the ADF. So again, the way in which the ADF, when they're present also at conferences, they're there for you to talk to. That's why they've actually gone along to those shows. So do talk to them.
Okay.
So I might add, Chris mentioned the Office of Defence Industry and Support. I might sort of add a few things onto that. So we've engaged the Office of Defence Industry and Support, formerly known as the CDIC. They offer a range of grants, business advisory services, and there's a lot of personnel working there who've been in defence for many years, who are veterans and can put you in direct contact with the end user. So they're a great resource. I highly recommend them.
And I think I'll just add as well, I will talk about the US funding a little bit, but US funding model is quite different, and there are people from the US that work in Australia. So usually Canberra, some in Melbourne, and they are responsible for funding researchers from outside of America. And they work with Australia with the ADF. So it's not, you know, you're doing work for them or the other. Everyone knows what everyone is doing in that space. But they offer funding programs where you can just go and visit people, for example. So it's not for a research project. It's, you know, I've got an idea. I want to go and talk to this person in the US about it. And so that's, you know, again, in terms of building these relationships, you know, that's another way to start. And they also fund, you know, research grants as well. Sometimes the US and the Australian counterparts will get together and say, I really like that project, and both nations will put money towards that as well. So don't think, well, you know, I can only get funded by Australian Defence Force. The US Defence Force fund a lot of work, you know, outside of the US, and a lot of it in Australia. And as I said, you know, it is a collaboration between Australia and US in that way.
Oh, I didn't know that. But there
Now you
you
know.
go. You live, you learn every day.
Every day is a school day.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it for our questions. And I thought there's an opportunity for people in the audience. If you've got questions, oh, hello. Paul's got a question.
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm the CTO of Invicta Prospects Group, work quite closely with Dan. And there's a couple of things that I've occasionally just bumped up against. So I'll ask it as a question rather than trying to, you know, lead the horse to water. So the first thing resonated very much when Ed was talking about know the language and the names. But one of the things, certainly from outside for me, that is quite difficult is for any particular project or a product, there are so many different departments, cross-cutting concerns. You've got to understand who your customer is. You've got to understand who all the stakeholders are, who is the decision maker, who are the influencers, and just navigating all the different, not just the logistics, but the actual end users. There's so many of them. And then you've got like IT departments and other things like that. To the two startups, maybe you can just talk a little bit about your experience, either coming from inside military or outside the military. How did you navigate through that minefield of all the different people you need to understand in the organization?
Thanks.
I guess I'll start. Despite wearing a uniform while serving, I had zero idea of business and procurement process. So it didn't really help me much wearing a uniform at all, to be honest. Once we left and engaged with Otis and the hub, we started to get a little bit of a better idea of how things worked. But then a lot of that was, I guess, self-discovery. So reading policy and documents, reading the Commonwealth procurement rules, so understanding that process, and then speaking with people of different ranks in the military and understanding, okay, how do they purchase this product? And I guess a good place to start for anybody who wants to know would be to do a bit of research, and you can Google this, it's open source, but to understand the capability life cycle and the different gates required in order for defence to, you know, identify a problem, identify a solution, purchase that solution, and then dispose of that at the end of its life. So, but it isn't easy. And again, the long procurement cycles also don't marry up well with posting cycles. So, you know, we've tried to sell products to defence where we've spent 18 months educating the customer. You know, we feel we're close to a sale, then they post out and a new person posts in, and that relationship building starts again. So it's very difficult. I think the best thing to do is really understand that the person who uses the product isn't the person who buys the product, isn't the person who signs off on the product, isn't the person who tests the product. So there's so many stakeholders that have an influence or say, and every product's different. So you really need to ask questions and nut out and map out that stakeholder engagement plan. It's not easy.
No, that sounds quite hectic.
I think, you know, again, from a civilian perspective, it is difficult. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So I think maybe that's another area the Innovation Hub is looking to improve as well. So introduction to operators, introduction to people who are decision makers. For a civilian, that's very difficult. I don't even know how I achieved it, to be sincerely honest. You know, I speak to people and people go, how the hell did you end up speaking to them? I really don't know. I think it's just one of those things you set your target and you go. Otherwise you're going to fail. So there are multiple people that you need to be sort of engaging with. But I think the key person is that advocate. You need that advocate within the ADF to actually sing your praises while you're sleeping, to actually sing your praises. And I think that's the important one. It's like anything else in life, is having that person who's gonna carry the song for you. So I think the advantage of the Australian military is that it is smaller, and you can probably more easily get to that person than it is in the US. US is slightly different in so much as key decision makers are lower down the rung. So you don't have to actually get to the top of the pile to actually get a decision or a sign off on a check. So it's slightly different modelling. But in Australia, if you can find that advocate who actually will speak to that decision maker, yeah, that's 3/4 of your journey.
Awesome. Great insights. Any other questions?
Yeah, given that the ADF is a fairly small fraction of global defence spending, you've touched on the Americans, but for a startup, is it worth pursuing international sales early on, or do foreign governments tend to be fairly protectionist in this space?
I can talk to a bit of the time frame piece. So from our program, when you submit an initial application, you're looking anywhere between 1 to 4 months for a response on that first sort of application. Then if you get invited to that second, which is a more detailed tender response, you're looking again another 1 to 4 months. Once, if successful in terms of entering into a negotiation with Defence for a contract, again, looking at another 1 to sort of 6 months to be awarded a contract now. So that's essentially anywhere between sort of 6 to 12 months just to start work on your idea, right? That's not quick. One of the reasons why it's not so quick is we sincerely work across the entire ADF. So you may have gone, I think this is an Army application, but we will also talk with Air Force, Navy, and other areas of defence to understand if there is broader utility for this technology, this idea, right? And so, again, coupling with the capability life cycle, it's now the One Defence capability system, it is a very long process. So GovTech or government cycle procurement is notoriously long, and that is recognised as well.
I think touching on that, selling to the ADF obviously is a bit of a long process, but it's also not cheap to go overseas, attend trade shows, have meetings, build relationships to sell overseas. The US and the UK are fairly quick with their response time for their innovation programs, and they can all be done online. So I would highly recommend targeting the Five Eyes community as early as possible and seeing if you can get sources of funding from all the different nations. And then whichever one bites first, I think that's where you should focus your efforts. I think had we sort of understood and a bit earlier on, we probably would have engaged the US a little bit earlier. We've been lucky to be funded by the Defence Innovation Hub, but again, had we had parallel activity, our business could have been twice the size it is now. So definitely engage as early as possible.
Again, another language that you have to understand is Five Eyes, is AUKUS. There is a thread that goes through those, so that's the language you need to be speaking when trying to target allied sort of collaborators. Ultimately, I think you want to be doing your stuff in Australia. To be sincerely honest, it's a small world, but it's still a big world. You still got to get yourself on a plane and get over there. It takes some time to speak to Americans. They still don't get us. They're probably making jokes about our accents for 3 days out of the 5-day meeting. Do you know what I mean? So you go, oh God, here we go again. So I think we've got the capabilities of actually doing it here. Off the back of COVID, we speak about sovereign capability, and we have that capability in Australia. So that's the other piece of the puzzle that you've got to understand is can you actually build it here? If you can actually do that and prove that you can, you're nearly home with the Australian military. So they're getting that now. The other thing is as well, when I do speak to the Yanks and I say, ultimately we want to build our stuff over there, they say, why do you want to build your stuff there? Just build it in Australia and then sell it to us. So this idea that we need to be going to America for a solution is not 100% true. So if you can line up your ducks in Australia, I think you're in a great place.
Yeah, keep the jobs local.
That's
Start commercializing your IP in America, the jobs go there too. So that's really important. And yeah, I totally concur. And some other questions? Eric has got.
You guys mentioned about the defense is looking for a faster horse when you are selling the Tesla. So how do you solve the problem, or like, do you have a band-aid solution at the moment? I mean, like, how do you influence them to get them to change the idea from a faster horse to the EV?
I think defence is aware of the elongated procurement cycles and the effect that that has on innovation, and they are doing things to change that process. I guess my only other suggestion would be with organisations like the Defence Innovation Hub, they'll typically fund innovation that has a pathway to acquisition within the Australian Defence Force. And I think that can be a double-edged sword. On one aspect, funding something that they know the ADF is going to purchase is great, but there's plenty of good ideas that can really help our country, which there is no clearly defined pathway to acquisition. But I still think those projects and innovations should be funded for a number of reasons. So first of all, it's going to build, foster innovation in Australia, and it's also going to build the Australian economy. And then, the innovators and the entrepreneurs, once they have a product that they can showcase, I have no doubt that they'll have every chance of commercialising that in other industries or in foreign defence forces. And then if and when Australia sees that, oh, hey, there's the new tool that I need, sometimes they need to see it fully commercialised before they commit to buying it. So I think we should definitely fund innovation that doesn't have clear pathways to acquisition. So that's my suggestion to keep this innovation going and growing.
And I think as well, sometimes you need to give them that faster horse first while you develop the better car. And I've seen projects that I've applied for where I've tried to sell them the Tesla, and they gave that grant to the faster horse instead, and that may still actually be an improvement for them. The faster horse is still better than the horse that they're riding, and so this is what I was saying before. You design that project so that you'll get there quicker, and you'll give them an improvement, and they'll be, hey, this is great, you're awesome. At the same time, if you designed your project well, then you can be making that even better solution for them and take them there incrementally. The other thing is, depending on the program that you're applying to, and often it's written in there, particularly for US funding, is that they will want a high risk, but with potentially high reward. Other programs will want a low risk with a guaranteed reward. So it depends on what it is that you're applying to, and then sometimes you just need to give them what they want initially, while at the same time, in really good faith, helping them to realize, listen, we've given you this, but this is actually where you want to get to. But sometimes a step change is just too much, and they just want an incremental change.
Dan, just for clarification on language, when you said it's important to find a pathway to acquisition, did you mean acquisition of the business or the actual purchase of product?
So I mean acquisition of the product or service you're looking to implement into defence.
Okay, I think we've got a question up the back, and then we've got one just here, and I think we'll break, give everyone, it's a bit warm in here, and we've got some nibbles for networking, so you can continue the conversations.
So I've got two questions, and it's about the life cycle and terminology. So the first is, if there's a situation where there's a demand within the defence and by way of RFP, does that preclude involvement with the innovation department? Number one.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, in terms of terminology, when they state that their intention is to co-design, can someone tell me what that actually means?
So I'll answer the first question in terms of if you're currently engaged in an alternate procurement process, and whether or not you can approach the likes of the Defence Innovation Hub to get further funding or to get funding, right? We do have a very clear exclusion clause on that particular piece. So we will not tolerate what's sort of colloquially coined double dipping, in terms of if you've been funded previously, not just within the Department of Defence, but any department, any Commonwealth department, be it for any nature of funding to develop that technology, we will not pay for it twice. That won't be tolerated. However, if you are working in conjunction with other areas of defence in terms of work that is developing a particular capability, either through a sustainment project, and you see innovation and you want to understand how you can develop that, there's no issue with that. That is helping a need problem. What you have to do is be clear about that with the department, with the Innovation Hub when you submit. So it's not a sudden surprise that when we start talking more broadly within departments, oh, this has already been going on. What's the nature of this? How does this work? How does this not work? Because we spend a lot of time trying to unpack that, because we don't want to be inadvertently judgmental and go, is this double dipping? We have to be very careful, because at the end of the day, it's also about awarding a contract, which is taxpayer money. So we have to be very careful and diligent with that process. So if you help us by telling us and the department and the Innovation Hub, yeah, exactly. So, and be as clear as you can. You can't do any wrong. So can you co-design piece in relation to what another nation, or as in with the ADF, or? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. So the contracts, yeah.
That might be a question, but we'll take that offline, because I think it provides a bit more of a detailed answer, and these places to figure out a little bit. I mean, you're not leaving.
Yeah.
No, I'm happy to.
I could probably give a really quick answer from my perspective in defence. So often we would work with different companies that would come in, that would manufacture odd bits and pieces. So a manufacturing company might produce a sling for our unit, that we use a sling for our weapon. And they would talk to the operators and say, you know, does this work well? Is it fit for purpose? And you could say, no, it gets caught here. It happens, you know, it's too tight, or whatever that might be. So I'm guessing, you know, working hand in hand with the operator to officially design something for defence. That's my understanding of co-design. Yeah, exactly like Digger Works. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So just literally working with the end user and the manufacturer.
I'd say it's foundational to our contracts in terms of, that's why we have a license. That's so that defence can understand for the acquisition opportunity or to not acquire because of certain reasons, that whole contractual approach, it's foundational.
And our final question.
Oh, thanks very much. Dave Hegarty from Know How here. And we sort of support what you said about the experience of working with Defence Innovation Hub. We came into it having no experience in defence whatsoever, and Defence Innovation Hub helped us through some of the engagement and terror of acronyms and processes and stuff, which can be somewhat weaponized, I think, by people inside defence when you're coming from outside. But I just had a really specific question really to Chris to follow up, because the one challenge that comes up over and over is it's so hard, even if you've got a hub project, to connect with people outside that silo inside defence. I noticed you mentioned that the Defence Innovation Hub and Otis should be able to be connecting you with the capability manager. And I've not found that to be the case. Finding out, because it's great you've got 5 priorities, but they're very, very high level. I think what innovators like ourselves want to do is say we can see a clear solution to a problem that must be there, but to find a capability manager who can help us connect with that, we've found that a real challenge. Are you saying that that's something that Otis should be able to do?
Yep. Okay. That is absolutely, they're there to support you as industry support in terms of connecting.
Right. Then I encourage everybody to push their Otis advisors harder then.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
I'm going to throw someone under the bus here, but one of our Otis advisors, James Donoghue, is a veteran, and he understands the defence organisational structure, and I think he's a great person. So ask for him specifically, and I'm sure he'll be able to connect you. Sorry, James.
It's got another microphone, so I can wrap it up, and so I didn't have to run off over there. But thank you. I hope everyone will join me in thanking our panel members today. Thank you so much. Having such a diverse group of people to talk on this, like you said, black box subject is fabulous, and thank you very much. This has been recorded. We'll share it if anyone wants to listen a bit more closely to this at another time, feel free. Thank you very much for attending our event, and stick around. We've got some nibbles so you can do some networking and have a few more chats. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.